So my name is Miles. I work on a project called Trustless. I'm wearing that shirt, Trust No One. That's kind of our motto. I'm here today to talk to you guys about something I'm very passionate about, which is truly decentralized and trustless finance. Um, so Bitcoin and Ethereum, they are obviously super new, novel technologies, but what makes them novel isn't actually any sort of underlying technology or cryptography or anything like that. What makes them novel is the way that they organize people into a decentralized network where you don't have to trust that anyone else will act in your own best interest. They will only have to act in their own best interest, and you can interact with people without even knowing who they are. And so that is what makes these decentralized networks so valuable, is this broad distribution of the power. So the problem, though, is that although the underlying networks are very decentralized, the actual protocols built on Ethereum especially, are not as decentralized as they could be, and in some cases are very dangerously centralized. And with over 3,000 protocols on Ethereum and hundreds of billions of dollars being locked up, this is an issue. So the example I like to point to is one that's shocking to a lot of people, but DAI is upheld as kind of a core decentralized finance, fully trustless DeFi protocol. The fact of the matter is, though, that DAI is over 57% backed by USDC. USDC is a highly centralized asset. They have the ability for a single centralized address to freeze accounts, unfreeze accounts, reverse transactions, et cetera, et cetera. So why is this actually bad? USDC is run by Circle. Circle is based in the US. It's also very close with the US government. Say the United States government said, hey, we don't like DAI. We don't think that it should exist. Circle, if you want to keep working with us, if you want to stay a legal entity, freeze the account that holds all of MakerDAO's USDC. And because DAI is over half backed by USDC, that would instantly under collateralize DAI and kind of take out a linchpin of DeFi. Another example I like to point to is Compound. Compound, over 40% of the comp token, and you can verify this on the Compound's own governance site, over 40% of Compound is held by the top 5 holders. And those people are Robert Leshner and 4 venture capital firms that he sold comp to. So although there's a decentralized governance system in place for Compound, those 4 to 5 actors can control and decide the fate of every single governance action. So DeFi, instead of being a broadly distributed system with many people holding all of the pieces and creating this trustless network of DeFi primitives, it ends up looking more like this, where you have these kind of localized nodes of people who are sucking out more power and more influence, either through admin keys or governance share, or any other mechanism that we'll get into here. Another big problem is that DeFi is extremely expensive. And I'm going to set that aside for now, and we'll come back to it at the end of the presentation. But I'm sure you've all sent a transaction to Ethereum where you spent way more than you thought you should. A wire fee is typically $30, and the fact that we have to pay way more than that, sometimes even just to move money, is a huge problem, a big existential threat for DeFi today. So Coinbase has broken our trust before. They vowed that USDC was backed all by cash, and that was clearly not true. We trusted that every USDC token could be redeemed for $1, and that's not true. Again, Ethereum is extremely expensive, and MakerDAO, beyond backing DAI, a decentralized stablecoin, by a highly centralized stablecoin USDC, they're also looking into KYCing the system. So what needs to change? How do you actually build a truly decentralized protocol? And how do you recognize when a protocol is not decentralized in the way that it purports to be? Well, first of all, the protocol needs to be broadly distributed. If there's a governance system and 40% or even 50 or 60% in a lot of cases is held by insiders, then that system is not actually decentralized. Sorry, I'll get more into those details here in a second, but I just wanted to show that there are fully decentralized DeFi protocols. Bitcoin is one, Ethereum is another, Uniswap is a really strong example of a fully decentralized DeFi protocol, specifically the pools. If you look at the code, and especially with Uniswap v2, the code is very simple and you can independently verify that money moves into and out of Uniswap contracts in three very specific ways. People add liquidity, people trade, and people remove liquidity. Those contracts also very specifically specify that there's no other way for a centralized entity, an admin key, a governance system to remove any of that liquidity from the system. And that is a strong example of a truly decentralized DeFi protocol. WETH is just a really simple one to wrap your head around. There's a simple contract, you add ETH, you get WETH, and vice versa. No admin keys, nothing else. And this is how we believe at Trustless, we believe that DeFi protocols should be built. So how to build trustlessly? Broad protocol ownership. Again, this is about reducing the percentage of a protocol that goes to insiders, reducing the percentage of a protocol that's owned by venture capital firms. A trap that a lot of protocols get into is they raise money early, they give up 20%, say, of the protocol for however many millions they need to get off the ground. And then once they get off the ground and they hold back some for themselves, they ended up being 40% or 50% is owned by insiders. So avoiding that scenario is one very important way to ensure broad protocol ownership. Another way is to introduce mechanisms so that if there's liquidity mining or any sort of fair launch, that anyone can participate equally, regardless of how much wealth they have. So for example, if you have $1 billion and you are able to suck up all of the liquidity mining rewards and essentially centralize the control of the protocol under yourself, that's a big problem. So defensively building protocols so that that is not the case is really important. I can talk about more how that can be achieved in the questions if anyone wants to know more about that. Trustless mechanisms. So if you have a really broadly distributed protocol, and then you have, say, an interest rate mechanism that targets a peg of $1, and this is a mechanism that one of the Trustless products has, and also a protocol like Maker has. If you introduce a mechanism, but that mechanism has centralized control, then you don't have as decentralized of a system. So for example, Maker, every week, they vote on changes to the interest rate. And this is, depending on how decentralized that MKR token actually is, this is a really clear point of centralization for their system. Instead, they could have a mechanism that automatically reacts to the price and simply adjusts the interest rate up and down. Minimal governance. A lot of protocols promise, hey, we're going to start out really centralized. We need this admin key to ensure that we can instantly upgrade in case anything goes wrong, and that we can keep your funds safe. That's great. The problem is that these admin keys end up sticking around for a really long time. They even publish sometimes, hey, trust us. We will remove these admin keys on this date and hold us accountable. Essentially, what you're doing then is trusting them to give up control and become trustless, which is an obvious oxymoron. So instead, what these protocols could be doing, and what the trustless protocols do, is they, instead of saying, hey, trust us, we'll decentralize on this date, Trustless hard codes these dates into the system so that contract upgrades can only happen for 3 months, say, or for 1 year. And parameter upgrades can only happen for 1.5 years or 2 years. And those dates are enforced by the code on chain. Minimal dependencies. So if you have a system that has broad protocol ownership, trustless mechanisms, and minimal governance, but then you introduce a dependency where a core piece of the protocol, say a collateral or a price oracle, is dependent on an outside source of data that can be manipulated or has an admin key, say a collateral type that can be infinitely minted, or a price mechanism that can be easily manipulated without costing the manipulator any value, then you have potentially centralized control. Someone who can use their power to steal value out of the system. So here's a brief summary: broad protocol ownership, minimal governance, minimal dependencies, trustless mechanisms. So here we kind of get back to the cost of DeFi. So currently, Ethereum is extremely expensive. It costs $50+ to interact with DeFi, and a great alternative is optimistic rollups. Optimistic rollups are cheaper and faster than ETH layer 1. However, their security guarantees are not nearly as strong as ETH layer 1. There's kind of a duct tape of economic incentives to try to ensure that the stakers who are validating the transactions don't misbehave, or else they get slashed. And it's kind of like this hodgepodge of economic mechanisms. Zero knowledge rollups, you get the most of both worlds. You have highly efficient, fast, cheap transactions, and through zero knowledge cryptography, the rollup directly inherits the security of the underlying chain. As Vitalik points out, in the medium to long term, zk rollups will win out in all use cases. So again, just to kind of visualize this, right now we're on ETH layer 1, rock solid settlement, hundreds of millions of dollars of value in the system, broadly decentralized, but slow and expensive. We have an opportunity now, as zero knowledge rollups are being developed, to build an ultra fast transaction layer on top of ETH layer 1 that directly inherits the security guarantees of Ethereum. And that's what Trustless is building. So I want to show you guys a quick demo. So this is our protocol. All of the code has been built from the ground up to be as trustless as it can possibly be, using all those building blocks that I described in the talk, and is currently running on the zkSync testnet. So the future is now. It's already happening. zkSync has achieved parity with Solidity contracts. You can take your Solidity contracts and compile them for zkSync, and that allows you to do things like this. So I'm adding 1 ETH of collateral, and I'm approving that collateral type. It'll take just a second because zkSync is extremely fast. And then I have now added Ethereum and borrowed 1,700 of these stablecoin that we call Hue out of our system. And that's all running on the zkSync testnet, and we'll be launching on zkSync mainnet as soon as it's ready to go live. So yeah, with that, I'll answer any questions anyone has.
Hi, Miles. This is Victor. Thank you for the presentation. Very interesting. I'm not a programmer, so maybe a little bit naive question.
Okay.
Ask. So you mentioned the benefit of a zk rollup. It's fast and it has the same security guarantee as layer 1. So I always believe that you cannot gain something without give up something. What's the cost of this benefit? Like you have fast and you still have same security and guarantee. It seems like it's perfect, it's wonderful, but what do we give up?
Absolutely. So a lot of the times the answer for DeFi protocols is that you give up smart contract risk. That by bolting on an additional protocol onto, maybe another protocol or adding code, you now have increased risk. And I think the same can be said for zero knowledge rollups. The risk is that the complex zero knowledge cryptography that is built on top of the base chain and directly derived, like augmenting the base chain, has some sort of bug. That someone who understands how all this cryptography works and they dig really deep and they find that bug and they can exploit it. So that's number 1. Number 2 is the timeline. Because this is a complex technology that's difficult to master, and as Vitalik said, zkSync snark technology will continue to improve over time. that it's essentially it's lagging, right? We had optimistic rollups beginning of 20. I don't actually know exactly when. Beginning of 2021, let's say. If someone knows exactly when that was, let me know. But we're still waiting for zero knowledge rollups. zkSync was getting close, quote unquote, to mainnet launch last year, and they still haven't launched their mainnet. So that's the other trade-off, is the complexity and the time.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
One question I had was around, you mentioned a fair distribution of tokens.
Mm-hmm.
And it's true that, you know, maybe don't have the bigger wallets to accumulate all the coins, but what about if they split up their mining, let's call it, across different wallets? How do you prevent that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the way that it's not a perfect solution, but the way that the trustless currency protocol is achieving this is by taking a snapshot or mining all the data of all the addresses that have sent a transaction to the Ethereum chain within some time period that ends before the trustless currency protocol launches. And then each one of those addresses can only earn a certain amount per unit of time. They can add as much value as they want to the system, but they will only earn up to a certain amount, say up to an equivalent of adding $500 to the system. And so this is a somewhat strong, but not foolproof, obviously, guarantee of making it so that each address can only participate once, and each individual can only participate once. The weakness is that if someone in that time period generated a lot of addresses and used them on the Ethereum chain and paid to submit a transaction, that they would be able to use each one of those addresses. But you can imagine if the cutoff is $500 and you have $1 billion, the type of overhead that would take just to transact with that many addresses, find all those addresses, et cetera, et cetera. So that's kind of the mechanism that we use there. The other kind of benefit of using this mechanism is people who have been priced out of other systems. When they're like, I cannot afford to compete with this person who has $1 billion or $100 million, they say, oh, wow, I can actually participate in this and get a reasonable portion of ownership of this protocol. We would expect them to go tell their friends. And as we know, the kind of network and the actual base of people using a system, the community, is what actually creates the value for a system. And so we're hoping that that mechanism will help bootstrap that community very rapidly.
And I guess, sorry, one question to follow up with that. Are you also doing a delegation process? So there's always a challenge of enough people coming to consensus on something to make decisions. So how do you balance the fair token distribution against moving things forward and voting on problems?
I'm not sure I fully understand. So everyone has, say in a perfect world, there's 10,000 people who each have an equal portion of the protocol. And then you're saying, how do you make sure that stuff still gets done, that people come together and they actually vote? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, cool. So in the trustless currency protocol, we introduce voting inflation rewards that are directed to addresses that vote. So for example, if you hold, say you hold 1% of the tokens, obviously this is not our goal that anyone hold 1%, but just for the sake of simplicity, you hold 1% of the tokens, and you and 10 other people who hold 1% vote. So 10% of the total supply is voting. Now, the total supply, you take the total supply and you add 0.5%, and that amount is minted for every vote and equally distributed among all of the people that vote. So it's a long way of saying voting is incentivized, and you can delegate, but if you do delegate, the person who votes with your tokens will end up getting those rewards. So if you want to become a part of the system, if you want to ensure that it becomes great, you must pay attention and vote, but you are rewarded with a greater share of ownership of the system for voting.
So thanks, that answers it.
Cool. Great. Any other questions?
Guess not.
If not, we can end there. Let me just
Try Twitter and or email in the
Fi and at Trust. So everything is Trustless Fi. So at Trustless Fi is the Twitter, and trustlessfi@gmail.com